When I found that blonde hair curled around the shower drain like a golden accusation, I knew my 3-year relationship was about to get very interesting. I calmly replaced his expensive shampoo with hair removal cream. By Thursday, my best friend Dorothy showed up at my door with patches of missing hair and tears streaming down her face. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. I'm Margaret Walsh, 68 years old, and after 16 years as a widow, I thought I'd finally found my second chance at love with Frank Garrett. 3 years of quiet dinners, Sunday morning crosswords, and the comfortable companionship that comes when you've both buried your first loves and aren't expecting fireworks anymore. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Frank had left early for his weekly golf game with the boys, kissing my cheek and promising to pick up groceries on his way back. I was humming an old Sinatra tune while cleaning our shared bathroom. Yes, we'd reached that comfortable stage where we each kept toiletries at the other's place. The shower drain was backing up again, something Frank had been meaning to fix for weeks. I rolled up my sleeves and started pulling out the usual culprits: soap residue, my own silver hair that seemed to shed more each year. But there, wrapped around my fingers like a silk ribbon, was a long blonde hair. Not mine. Definitely not mine. I held it up to the bathroom light, studying it like evidence in a crime scene. It was the color of summer wheat, with the artificial shine that only comes from a bottle. The kind of blonde that whispers, "Look at me," in a crowded room. Frank's late wife, Patricia, had been a brunette until the day she died. I'd seen enough photos to know. My hands started trembling, not with age, but with that particular rage that comes when you realize you've been played for a fool. Again. At 68, I thought I was past the age of romantic betrayals, but apparently some lessons have to be learned the hard way, multiple times. I carefully placed the hair in a tissue and tucked it into my jewelry box, right next to my wedding ring from Robert. 2 betrayals side by side. How poetic. Frank returned 3 hours later, whistling and carrying grocery bags like a man without a care in the world. "How was your golf game?" I asked sweetly, not looking up from my crossword. "Terrible," he laughed, unpacking orange juice and his favorite whole wheat bread. "Jim beat me by 12 strokes. I think I need new glasses." "Maybe you need new friends," I murmured, pen poised over 7 across. A woman who deceives. The answer was right there in black and white. Adulteress. That evening, I watched Frank like a detective studying a suspect. Every phone call, every glance at his watch, every excuse to step outside for fresh air. I'd been a widow for 16 years before Frank came along. I knew the difference between a man who was happy to be home and a man who was thinking about being somewhere else. During dinner, he mentioned that Dorothy had looked tired at the grocery store. "Probably working too many hours at that flower shop," he said, cutting his steak with unusual precision. "You should check on her this week." Dorothy Stevens had been my best friend for 40 years. We'd raised our children together, buried our husbands within 2 years of each other, and survived every kind of crisis 2 women could face. She was the one who'd encouraged me to give Frank a chance when we met at the Senior Center's book club 3 years ago. "She's been through a lot," I agreed, watching Frank's face for any tell. "Divorce, that awful bout with pneumonia last year. At 66, she deserves some happiness." Frank nodded vigorously, too vigorously. "Absolutely. She's a good woman, deserves better than what life's given her." The way he said "good woman" made my stomach clench. It was the tone men use when they're already thinking about saving someone. After Frank went to bed, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and my phone. Dorothy's number was on speed dial, had been for decades. But tonight, instead of calling, I found myself scrolling through her social media posts. Something I'd never felt the need to do before. There she was, beaming in photos from 2 weeks ago. Dinner at Romano's. Sometimes life surprises you in the best ways. The restaurant looked expensive, candlelit, the kind of place Frank had taken me for my birthday last month. Another post from last week. New haircut and color, feeling 20 years younger. The photo showed Dorothy with freshly highlighted blonde hair, styled in loose waves that framed her face beautifully. My tea grew cold as I stared at that photo. Dorothy had been a redhead our entire friendship, proud of her Irish heritage and the fiery curls that matched her personality. The woman in this photo looked sophisticated, confident, The kind of woman who might catch the eye of a 72-year-old widower looking for a little excitement. I set down my phone and walked to the bathroom, retrieving the tissue from my jewelry box. Under the harsh fluorescent light, I compared the hair to Dorothy's new style on my phone screen. Perfect match. The next morning, I called Dorothy with my sweetest voice. "Want to grab lunch today? It's been too long since we had a proper chat." Dorothy chose the cafe, a quaint little place downtown with checkered tablecloths and the kind of atmosphere that invited confessions. She arrived 10 minutes late, flustered and apologetic, her new blonde highlights catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "Sorry, Margaret, lost track of time at the salon. Touch-up appointment. You know how it is." She slid into the booth across from me, unconsciously running her fingers through her freshly styled hair. "The blonde looks lovely on you," I said, meaning it. Dorothy had always been pretty, but this new look gave her a glow I hadn't seen since before her divorce 5 years ago. "Very youthful," she blushed like a teenager. "Oh, this old thing? Just needed a change, you know? 66 is too young to feel invisible." I ordered the chicken salad. She asked for just coffee. "Not hungry?" I pressed. "Had a big breakfast," she said quickly. Too quickly. Dorothy had been diabetic for 10 years and never skipped meals. "So tell me about Frank. How are things going with you two?" It was a question she'd asked dozens of times over the past 3 years, usually with genuine enthusiasm for my late-in-life romance. Today, her voice carried a different tone. Guilty curiosity, maybe, or the careful probing of someone fishing for information. "Oh, you know Frank," I said, stirring my iced tea with deliberate slowness. "Predictable as clockwork. Golf every Tuesday, grocery shopping after, home by 2:30. Never varies his routine." Dorothy's coffee cup rattled against the saucer when she set it down. That's good. Routine. Stability. I took a sip of tea, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "Though lately, he's been mentioning you quite a bit." Her face went pale beneath her carefully applied foundation. "Me? What about?" "Oh, just that he thinks you've seemed happier lately. More vibrant. He noticed the new hair color when he saw you at the grocery store yesterday." "He did?" The question came out as barely a whisper. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but my eyes sharp. "Dorothy, you've been my dearest friend for 40 years. Through Robert's death, through your divorce, through every crisis either of us has faced. If something's troubling you, you can tell me." For a moment, I thought she might. Her mouth opened, her eyes filled with tears, and her hands twisted in her lap like she was trying to hold something inside. But then she straightened, composing herself with visible effort. "Nothing's troubling me, Margaret. I'm just finding my footing again, trying to build a new life after everything that's happened." "Of course," I said softly. "Just remember, Dorothy, some foundations aren't as solid as they appear." She left 10 minutes later, claiming a sudden headache. I watched through the cafe window as she hurried down the sidewalk, her blonde hair gleaming in the sunlight like a beacon of betrayal. That night, I lay in bed next to Frank, listening to his steady breathing and planning my next move. Friday morning brought unseasonably warm weather and crystal-clear intentions. Frank announced he'd be spending the day helping his nephew move furniture, a story that sounded rehearsed. I kissed him goodbye and waited exactly 15 minutes before heading to the drugstore. The beauty aisle overwhelmed me with its promises of transformation. Hair removal creams lined the bottom shelf like instruments of war. I selected the strongest formula available, designed for coarse, stubborn hair with warnings about leaving it on too long. Perfect. Back home, I stood in Frank's bathroom studying his premium shampoo bottle. $28 for something that promised to revitalize aging hair with botanical extracts. I unscrewed the cap and inhaled the expensive cedar scent one last time before dumping the contents down the drain. The hair removal cream transferred easily, its chemical smell masked by the bottle's narrow opening. I added a few drops of the original shampoo on top for authenticity, then carefully placed the bottle back in its exact position on the shower caddy. Phase 1 complete. Saturday arrived with the kind of nervous energy that precedes a performance. Frank showered first, humming off-key, while I pretended to read the newspaper. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his silver hair looked exactly the same. Hair removal cream needed time to work, especially on someone who probably used it sparingly. Dorothy called. I announced casually, not looking up from the crossword. Invited us both to brunch tomorrow at her place. Said she has exciting news to share. Frank's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. Both of us? Seemed important to her that you be there specifically. I penciled in betrayal for 14 down. I hope you don't mind that I accepted. No. Of course not. Dorothy's a lovely woman. Just surprised she included me. She considers you family now, I said sweetly. After 3 years, we're all practically relatives. The irony wasn't lost on me. In some families, this would be called adultery. In others, it might just be called Tuesday. That evening, Frank showered again, unusual for him on weekends. This time, I heard the shower running longer than normal, followed by what sounded like concerned muttering. When he finally emerged, a towel wrapped around his waist, I could see the beginning of what my revenge would accomplish. Small patches of his silver hair looked thinner, almost translucent in spots. He ran his hand through it repeatedly, frowning at his reflection in the bedroom mirror. "Everything all right?" I asked from the bed, my voice perfectly innocent. "Hair feels strange, softer somehow. Maybe it's that expensive shampoo finally working," I suggested. "You always said it was worth the money." He nodded uncertainly and climbed into bed, but I could feel his restlessness beside me. 3 times during the night, I felt him get up to check his hair in the bathroom mirror. By Sunday morning, the damage would be undeniable. Sunday morning brought Frank's panicked voice from the bathroom. "Margaret, something's wrong with my hair." I took my time getting up, slipping into my robe with deliberate calm. Frank stood before the mirror, running his fingers through patches where his hair had thinned to wisps overnight. Other sections looked completely normal, creating a bizarre patchwork effect across his scalp. "Oh my," I said, joining him at the mirror. "That is concerning." "I don't understand it," he muttered, turning his head this way and that. "It's like my hair just dissolved in spots." "Maybe you should see a doctor," I suggested helpfully. Though I did read somewhere that extreme stress can cause sudden hair loss. "Stress?" He turned to look at me, confusion written across his face. What would I be stressed about? "Oh, I don't know," I said, adjusting his collar with wifely concern. "Sometimes we carry stress without realizing it. Guilt has a way of manifesting physically." Frank's reflection went pale in the mirror. "Guilt? Just a theory," I said lightly. "Now, about Dorothy's brunch. Should we call and cancel? You might not feel comfortable going out looking—" "No!" The response came too quickly, too desperate. "I mean, we can't disappoint Dorothy. I'll just wear a hat." 15 minutes later, Frank emerged from the bedroom, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead. He'd managed to comb the remaining hair to partially cover the thin spots, but the overall effect was that of a man trying very hard to hide something. "You look fine," I assured him, patting his arm. "Dorothy will understand." The drive to Dorothy's house was unusually quiet. Frank kept adjusting his cap and checking his reflection in the side mirror. I hummed contentedly, enjoying the autumn scenery and the sweet anticipation of what was to come. Dorothy lived in a charming cottage with a garden that showcased her work at the flower shop. Mums and late-season roses created a riot of color along the walkway. She met us at the door wearing a flowing floral dress that complemented her blonde highlights perfectly. "Margaret, Frank." She hugged me first, then hesitated before giving Frank a quick, awkward embrace. "I'm so glad you could both come." "We wouldn't miss it," Frank said, his voice strained. "You mentioned exciting news?" Dorothy's eyes sparkled with nervous energy. "Let's get you some coffee first." "I made your favorite cinnamon rolls, Margaret." As she led us to her dining room, I noticed Frank removing his cap and running his hand through his patchy hair. Dorothy glanced back just as he did it, and I saw her eyes widen in shock. "Frank, are you feeling all right?" she asked, stopping so suddenly that I nearly bumped into her. "Your hair looks fine," Frank said quickly, jamming the cap back on his head. "Just trying a new styling product." Dorothy shot me a questioning look, but I just smiled serenely. "Men and their vanity," I said with a little laugh. "At our age, we should embrace what we have." The irony of that statement, coming from a woman who'd just sabotaged her boyfriend's hair care routine, wasn't lost on any of us. We settled around Dorothy's antique dining table, the tension so thick it could have been cut with her grandmother's cake server. Dorothy served coffee with shaking hands, the porcelain cups rattling against their saucers as she moved around the table. Her blonde hair caught the morning sunlight streaming through her kitchen window, creating an almost ethereal glow that made Frank stare despite his obvious discomfort. "So," I said, cutting into a cinnamon roll with surgical precision, "this exciting news of yours?" Dorothy glanced between Frank and me, her composure cracking like old paint. "Well, actually, maybe I should wait. Frank doesn't look well." "I'm fine," Frank insisted, but his hand moved unconsciously to his baseball cap again. Underneath the brim, I could see more thin patches had appeared overnight. The hair removal cream was working beautifully. "No, really," Dorothy pressed, leaning forward with what looked like genuine concern. "Frank, when did this start? Have you seen a doctor?" "It's just stress," he mumbled into his coffee cup. "Stress?" Dorothy's voice pitched higher. "What kind of stress?" I watched this exchange with the satisfaction of a chess player who just moved her queen into position. "Dorothy, dear, you seem awfully concerned about Frank's health. That's so thoughtful of you." The color drained from her face. "Well, you're both my friends. Of course I'm concerned." "Of course," I agreed, taking a delicate sip of coffee. "Frank was just telling me yesterday how much he values your friendship." "Weren't you, Frank?" Frank's eyes darted between us like a cornered animal. "Yes, Dorothy's been very supportive." "Supportive," I repeated, savoring the word. "That's exactly what I was hoping to hear." Dorothy set down her coffee cup with enough force to crack it. "Margaret, is everything all right?" "Everything." "You're acting strange." "Strange?" I tilted my head innocently. "I'm just enjoying this lovely brunch with my dear friend and my boyfriend. Though I have to say, Dorothy, your hair looks absolutely stunning. When did you decide to go blonde?" "About a month ago," she whispered. "A month," I mused. "Funny timing. Frank's been coming home from his Tuesday golf games so much happier lately. Also, about a month ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Frank's hand trembled as he reached for his napkin. Dorothy stared at her plate as if it contained state secrets. "You know," I continued conversationally, "I found the most interesting thing in my shower drain last week. A blonde hair. Not mine, obviously." Dorothy's intake of breath was audible. Frank's coffee cup clattered against his saucer. "These old houses," I went on, "they hold on to evidence for the longest time. Hair, fingerprints, secrets. Amazing what surfaces when you start looking closely." "Margaret," Dorothy began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Oh, don't worry, dear," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I'm not angry. Disappointed, perhaps, but not angry." I walked around the table and placed my hand gently on Dorothy's shoulder. She flinched at the contact. "After 40 years of friendship, I would have expected you to be honest with me. And Frank?" I turned to him, my smile never wavering. "After 3 years together, I thought you had more integrity." I picked up my purse and headed for the door. "Enjoy your exciting news. Whatever it is, I'll find my own way home." Behind me, I heard Frank calling my name, and Dorothy starting to cry. But I didn't look back. Phase 2 was complete, and the final act was just beginning. The truth was about to get very expensive for both of them. Frank caught up with me 3 blocks from Dorothy's house, his baseball cap askew and patches of his scalp visible where the hair removal cream had done its work. "Margaret, please, let me explain." I kept walking, my pace steady and deliberate. At 68, I'd learned that dignity was maintained through composure, not drama. "Explain what, Frank?" "How long you've been showering at my house after visiting Dorothy. How you've been using my bathroom to wash off her perfume." "It's not what you think," he panted, struggling to keep up. I stopped so suddenly he nearly collided with me. "Oh, it's exactly what I think. The question is, how long did you expect me to remain blind to it?" Frank's hand moved to his thinning hair again, a nervous tick that brought me considerable satisfaction. "The hair thing. Did you—" "Hair removal cream," I said pleasantly. "Industrial strength. I imagine it'll take several months to grow back properly, assuming it grows back at all at your age." His face went pale. "You could have caused permanent damage. Like the permanent damage you've caused to my trust?" I resumed walking. "I'd say we're even." He grabbed my arm, desperation making him bold. "Margaret, I love you. This thing with Dorothy, it just happened. It doesn't mean anything." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back at his face. Frank, you're 72 years old. Nothing just happens at our age. Every choice is deliberate. You don't understand, he pleaded. Dorothy was so lonely after her divorce. She needed someone, and you needed to be needed, I finished. How noble of you. Tell me, Frank, how many other lonely women have you rescued over the years? The question hit its mark. Frank's grip loosened, and his eyes couldn't meet mine. There have been others. Finally, the truth. I pulled my arm free and continued toward home. At least you're honest about being a serial savior. I appreciate that level of self-awareness. Where are you going? He called after me. Home. To pack your things. I didn't turn around. You have until 6 o'clock to collect them from my front porch. Behind me, I heard Frank's footsteps stop. When I reached the corner and finally looked back, he was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, his patchy head bare to the world, looking every bit as lost as he probably felt. Good. Dorothy appeared at my door 2 hours later, her blonde hair disheveled and her eyes red from crying. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Margaret, please, she said through the screen door. We need to talk. I'd been expecting this visit. In fact, I'd prepared for it with a pot of Earl Grey and my grandmother's china, the good stuff reserved for special occasions. Nothing said, "This conversation matters," quite like proper tea service. Come in, I said, opening the door. Though I have to say, Dorothy, your timing is terrible. Frank just left with his belongings. She followed me to the living room, perching on the edge of my sofa like she might need to flee at any moment. I poured tea with steady hands, pleased that my years of hosting church ladies had prepared me for this exact scenario. How long? I asked, settling into my favorite armchair. 6 weeks, she whispered. I nodded, doing the math. Right around the time you got the blonde highlights. Margaret, you have to understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You're 66, divorced and lonely. Frank is 72, recently retired, and bored with his predictable girlfriend. You found each other at a vulnerable moment and decided my feelings were less important than your mutual neediness. Dorothy flinched as if I'd slapped her. It wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. She twisted her hands in her lap, the gesture so familiar it made my chest ache. 40 years of friendship, and I knew all her tells. We ran into each other at the grocery store about 2 months ago. I was having a panic attack in the cereal aisle. A panic attack? Despite everything, concern crept into my voice. The divorce papers were finalized that morning. 32 years of marriage. And suddenly, I was nobody. No husband, no identity, no purpose. Tears started flowing again. Frank found me crying between the Cheerios and the cornflakes. I sipped my tea, waiting. He was so kind, Margaret. He helped me to his car, let me sob for 20 minutes, then took me for coffee, just to talk. And talking led to Tuesday golf games? Dorothy's face crumpled. He said you two had settled into a routine, that the passion was gone, that you treated him more like a roommate than a lover. The accusation stung because it held a grain of truth. Frank and I had fallen into comfortable patterns, but comfort wasn't betrayal. So you decided to provide the passion I was lacking? I didn't plan it. Dorothy's voice rose. It just evolved. Coffee turned into lunch turned into dinner, and then he started showering at my house afterward, I finished. She nodded miserably. I set down my teacup with deliberate precision. Dorothy, in 40 years of friendship, have I ever lied to you? No. Have I ever betrayed your confidence? No. Have I ever pursued a man you were interested in? No. But then help me understand why you thought it was acceptable to pursue mine. The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of us could extinguish. Dorothy left an hour later, no closer to forgiveness than when she'd arrived. I watched from my front window as she sat in her car for 10 minutes, crying into her phone, probably calling Frank, seeking comfort from the man who'd caused this entire mess. I'd given her the same choice I'd given him, honesty or absence. She'd chosen justification over accountability, which told me everything I needed to know about the friendship I'd thought would last forever. That evening, I called my lawyer. Richard Morrison here. Richard, it's Margaret Walsh. I need to discuss my will. Of course, Margaret. What changes are you considering? I looked around my living room. The antique furniture Robert and I had collected over 25 years of marriage, the photographs documenting a life well lived, the financial security I'd built through careful planning and modest living. I want to remove Dorothy Stevens as my beneficiary and executor. May I ask why? Breach of trust. I'll send you the details in writing tomorrow. Very well. Any thoughts on replacement beneficiaries? I smiled, an idea forming. Actually, yes. I want to donate everything to the Senior Center's Widow Support Group. Every penny. That's quite generous. It's quite necessary, I said. These women deserve better than what they're getting. After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine, the good bottle Frank had been saving for a special occasion. Tonight, qualified. My phone rang at 9:30. Dorothy's name appeared on the screen. Hello, Dorothy. Margaret, please don't hate me forever. I don't hate you, I said, surprising myself with the truth. I pity you. That's worse. Yes, it is. Frank ended it tonight, she said quietly. Told me it was a mistake, that he wants to try to work things out with you. I almost laughed. And you're calling to ask if I'll take him back? Are you? I swirled the wine in my glass, watching the deep red liquid catch the lamplight. Dorothy, let me ask you something. If the situation were reversed, if I had betrayed you with your boyfriend, would you take me back? The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. No, she finally whispered. Then you have your answer. What happens now? Now you learn to live with the consequences of your choices, just like I'm learning to live with mine. I ended the call and turned off my phone. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight was mine alone. Frank returned 3 days later, standing on my front porch with a bouquet of grocery store flowers and the defeated posture of a man who'd run out of options. His hair looked even worse, the remaining strands wispy and uneven, like a scarecrow after a windstorm. I look ridiculous, he said, without preamble. Yes, I agreed, opening the screen door. You do. The barber said it might never grow back properly. Something about chemical damage to the follicles. That's unfortunate. He studied my face, searching for some crack in my composure. You don't feel guilty at all, do you? Should I? You could have permanently disfigured me. I stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind me. Frank, you permanently disfigured our relationship. I temporarily disfigured your hairline. I'd say you got off easy. Margaret, please. I made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. Multiple choices over multiple weeks with my best friend. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. He set the flowers on my porch railing, his shoulders sagging. What can I do to fix this? Nothing. There has to be something. Tell me about the others. Frank's head snapped up. What others? You said there have been others. How many lonely women have you rescued, Frank? He looked like a man walking toward his own execution. Margaret, I don't see how that's relevant. Humor me. 3, he whispered. My heart stopped. 3 others besides Dorothy? No, 3 total, including Dorothy. So 2 women before me. Frank nodded miserably. Helen Morrison, right after my Patricia died. She was recently divorced, needed help with her garden. And Susan Wright. When I met you, she was transitioning. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Susan Wright, the woman who moved to Florida right after we started dating. She didn't move, Frank said quietly. I ended it when I realized I was serious about you. I gripped the porch railing, needing something solid to anchor me. How long with Susan? 2 years. 2 years. I looked at this man I thought I knew, seeing him clearly for the first time. So while you were courting me, you were sleeping with her. It wasn't like that. How was it, Frank? Explain to me how sleeping with 2 women simultaneously isn't exactly like that. He couldn't meet my eyes. You deserve better than me. Yes, I said simply. I do. But as I watched him walk away, his shoulders hunched and his patchy scalp catching the afternoon sunlight, I realized something that would change everything. I deserved better than all of them. 6 months later, I sat in my real estate agent's office, signing the final papers to sell my house. The check was larger than I'd expected. Apparently, my modest neighborhood had become quite desirable to young families. Congratulations, Mrs. Walsh, Linda said, sliding the paperwork across her desk. Cash sale, no contingencies. Where will you be moving? Europe, I said, enjoying the surprise on her face. I'm taking an extended cruise. Mediterranean first, then maybe the Baltic. I hear the northern lights are spectacular from a ship's deck. The door chimed, and Dorothy walked in, looking older than her 66 years. I'd seen her around town occasionally over the past months, usually shopping alone, her blonde highlights grown out to reveal gray roots. "Margaret," she said quietly, "I heard you were selling." "Dorothy." I finished signing the documents and slipped them into my purse. "How are you?" "Frank's in the hospital," she said without preamble. "Prostate surgery. He's been asking for you." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "I'm sure he has. He's scared, Margaret. He has no family, no real friends. Just us. He has you," I said evenly. Dorothy shook her head. "We ended it months ago. After that day at my house, we tried to make it work, but the guilt destroyed everything." "How unfortunate. Don't you care at all?" Dorothy's voice cracked. "After 3 years together?" I paused at the door, looking back at my former best friend. "Dorothy, do you know what I've learned in the past 6 months?" She shook her head. "I've learned that caring about people who don't respect you is the fastest way to disappear from your own life." I adjusted my purse strap. "I spent 40 years caring about you, 3 years caring about Frank, and 68 years caring about everyone else's feelings more than my own. And now I care about me." I walked out into the crisp autumn air, leaving Dorothy standing in the real estate office. My ship departed from Boston in 3 days. My cabin was booked, my passport updated, and my future entirely my own. As I drove through town for the last time, I passed the senior center where Frank and I had met. Through the windows I could see the book club meeting, a circle of women discussing their latest selection. New faces, new stories, new possibilities for heartbreak and healing. I pulled over and watched for a moment, remembering the woman I'd been 3 years ago, hopeful, trusting, willing to believe in second chances. She wasn't gone entirely, that woman. She'd just learned to be more selective about where she invested her hope. My phone buzzed with a text from the cruise line. Final boarding instructions attached. Bon voyage. I smiled, put the car in drive, and headed toward the highway. Behind me lay a life lived for others. Ahead lay oceans I'd never seen and adventures I'd never imagined. At 68, I was finally ready to find out who Margaret Walsh could become when she stopped trying to be what everyone else needed. The best revenge, it turned out, wasn't hair removal cream or public humiliation. The best revenge was living well. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.